Hello everybody. This is Ralph Ferret from the Plymouth and East Cornwall. I'm here today with Tony Bouch from the NEC and PEC, doing the long-promised questions and answers video. So, Tony, afternoon. How you doing?
Hi, Rob. Right, I'm not too bad, mate. A bit busy as I think as we all are.
Okay, so we've had lots and lots of questions submitted. Just to let you know, what we're going to deal with here is these are going to be questions that we've had submitted to Tony about the deal. Some of the questions that we've had are more for the branch to explain the branch's recommendation. And just to let you all know that we'll be doing a separate video where we talk from the branch's perspective about how we'd come to our recommendation. And that's going to be coming in the next week or so. So I'm going to start, Tony, if that's all right, with a question from Lee Cansfield, and Lee has said, what, if anything, have deliveries gained from this deal?
Yeah, that's fine, mate. So I think I don't think we could. Two things first and foremost. So the agreement is a package and it's all functions. So the union is the collective, and I think it's wrong if we start to split out each function, because we could do that for the same, for processing, for distribution, for network delivery, for end customer experience, parcel process, etc. But in terms of delivery, it's where the largest proportion of our members are, and clearly one of the biggest impacts is the later starts and finishes. Now, what I would say, particularly for delivery, is people do need to understand where the business and what the business were proposing last year in two parts. One, the changes that they needed, that's what they put out in June, and then subsequently their best and final offer. And if you look at delivery on two parts just alone, so on the later starts, the business were absolutely clear that they were looking for year one for an hour changes start and finish times from September this year, which would have meant taking out all of the air network, 18 of the air flights that would come out of situ. And what that meant is that we would be on a progression to, over the 3-year period, move into a 1700 last letter time. So that's what the business proposed on that. What we've now got is there should be no changes to start and finish times this financial year, unless agreed locally, and there is no need for people to do that unless it suits them, because there's no changes to the pipeline. And then what we've agreed is, in terms of a 1630 last letter time, is that there will still be the majority finishing by 1530, the vast majority by 1600, and exceptional circumstances. Now, we've seen some stuff on that in terms of what that does for each of the mail centre catchment areas, and the union's committed to issuing that impact for start and finish times for every delivery office by the time ballot papers have gone out. Now, the reason why that hasn't gone out yet is, one, because the company wants to do that jointly, and secondly, that there is a huge amount of work. So one is going to be indicative modelling, right? Because and from a worst case scenario. Now, the union is absolutely clear that when we get into the national joint working group and the local joint working group, that the activity we do about how does mail get around the country, the flow of mails in mail centres, how process that mail, and then how we get it from A to B, the union is absolutely clear that we should be able to make that even better and bring that greater. So but the stats at this moment in time is based on what Royal Mail has shared, based on an indicative model, based on a Wednesday scenario, based on the current full-time duty structures in place in the predominant pattern in those offices, that 65% of delivery offices will still finish their duty before 1530. And if you think about that, we currently have a 1530 last letter time for urban and a 1630 for rural. That means 65% of the deliveries and 65% of delivery offices will be finishing alongside the current deal. So I think that's important. Now, the challenge for the union is to make that better, and the challenge will be to get the 35% that finish after 1530 to before 1530 and try and bring that earlier. So there's a huge amount of work to do, but there's that. So that is a massive shift from everyone going to a 1700 last letter, and it's a massive shift from what the company was saying. So I think there's that. On the second part for deliveries is that the company wanted a situation where no one would have a finish time. They wanted total flexibility with their flexi time, and they wanted a yearly flexible banking system. What we've moved to, and what the company has now agreed, is seasonal variation. And on their seasonal variation, they were planning for it, and the change that they needed. In the summer period, people will work 32 hours, and in the winter, people will work up to 44 hours. We have completely decimated what the business wanted. So one, there is no yearly flex. Two, there is no flexi time situation in place. We've agreed to review how flexibility agreement works in practice, but that's an agreement that's been in place since 2007, and it's about how we maintain that. And that talks about not a daily occurrences. It talks about like force majeure scenarios, so i.e. the lorry broke down on the way to your delivery office, and I think in most instances people would understand that and look to do something different around that, and be flexible. The bit that we've agreed on is seasonal variation, and this is something I think, you know, potentially we as a union we could have explained better, but we agreed that all of our branches around the country agreed this as a CDW policy at our policy forum a couple of years ago, and that was for us to try and do with lapse and absorption that everyone hates. So where workload drops down in the summer and it obviously increases in the winter, to do away with lapse and absorption, we've agreed that the seasonal variation model will be. And it literally is for X amount of weeks of the year that everyone will know up front for the main bulk of the year when you're working your contractual hours 37, you'll know the weeks that you're doing that. And then for the summer months, the lighter periods of the 14 weeks, you'll be working 35 hours, and on the heavier weeks, you'll be working your 39. And our view is when that comes to managing workload and the fluctuations of workload, that is a much better process in terms of seasonal variation alongside no lapse and absorption or a reduction of lapse and absorption, and dealing with the traffic is a much better process than what Royal Mail were posing on seasonal variation and on total flexibility and yearly flexible hours. So, but for delivery staff, I know that's difficult for people to probably get their heads, not necessarily get their heads around, but because of the, let's be brutally honest, we've seen the quality of service results yesterday for Royal Mail in terms of what Ofcom are doing an investigation in. People only see what happens in their office day in, day out now. We're trying to get to a position where we have a better structure in place. And if you were looking from a structure of there's a bum on every seat, every job's covered, and your office was working as it should be, this process of seasonal variation should mean that this constant managerial chaotic approach to dealing with traffic fluctuations is gone. So yeah, I think that hopefully covers off these kind of questions.
I mean, just to be a little bit devil's advocate here, Tony, and I think this is something that kind of flows through quite a lot of the questions we've had. I'm sure if Lee was sat here with me now, what he'd come back to you with on that is, well, that's you moving one set of bad change proposals to a less set of bad change proposals, but that's everything that you've talked about is worse than what we've got at the moment. Do you accept that categorization, or do you think that's unfair?
To be fair, I think it's probably unfair in the sense of some of the things that have been. I've seen all sorts of stuff on social media and the way it's been labelled. But our members hate lapse and absorption. We know that, and we do know that the traffic changes through the year. So you know we've gone with what all of our branches agreed 2 years ago as a policy forum as a better way, and I'm confident that when we get that seasonal variation up and running, and we get the infrastructure in place, I actually think it's probably one of those moments, Rolf, that particularly the delivery members go, once it's been in place and working and there's a better way of working, people will go, I know at the start of the financial year, I know what weeks I'm working 35, I know what weeks I'm working 37, I know what weeks I'm 39, I'm dealing with the workload fluctuations, and I think we'll be able to convince the business through that pilot activity. So at the moment, on the heavier weeks, it'll be starting earlier, so to get people out on delivery earlier to be able to complete their deliveries. And then the lighter periods, at the moment, the business's view is it's 14 minutes off the start, 10 minutes off the end. I'm confident that we'll be able to convince them that the delivery staff is much better at the end of the duty. So I do think this is one of the, and I understand it, because look, trust and confidence is at an all-time low in the organisation. People are seeing the chaos in their delivery offices. But I do think this is one of those things that fast forward 12 months, I actually think people will go, actually, I understand it, and it's a much better way for me to be working and dealing with the fluctuations.
Okay, so the next question from Lee in PL9 delivery office, and I think this covers some similar sort of ground to the last one. But what Lee's saying is that in PL9, the start times have already changed by executive action by 20 to 30 minutes, which has already put school pickups in jeopardy. And what Lee's saying is, with the union supporting these changes, how do you expect us to support the union in the after the last 12 months of lies? Now, I'm just going to say before I bring Tony in, Lee, the union locally or nationally have not accepted these changes to start times. We've been fighting them since the minute they came in, and indeed I know that we're currently in a process of a disagreement, and we're trying to get showdown talks with the new ROD and the new HR director to get those start time changes moved back in the Plymouth City Delivery Office. But I think on the sort of wider point, Tony, I think probably what Lee's getting at is, look, whichever way you dress it up, we're going to be able to make some changes to Royal Mail plans, but there will be changes to start times and some changes to finish times, and that is going to happen in deliveries. So I think the way I'm going to, before I bring you in to supplement that though, is I think it's probably worth you explaining what the alternative is if we don't do a deal with Royal Mail where we have control of start times, because my view is that we don't have a choice between everything staying as it was before the dispute or a deal. There's potentially other things coming out, and I wondered what your thoughts were on that.
Yeah, will do. So that, I mean, I think this is a very emotive issue for people. I know it is in terms of later starts and finishes, and I think it was the number one issue. But what's been driven by it is the business's need to exit the air network. So, you know, we've got a lot of packets and parcels. We've got a lot of the products we deliver that are growing in size. And if you look at the air network, Rolf, I think the air network costs the business 6 times more in terms of the cost between air versus road and rail. It's 8 times more greater in terms of its environmental impact between road and rail. And in terms of quality, it's 13 times worse when it comes to road and rail. So I think there is the business could have served notice on those flights coming out, and we'd have had to deal with that retrospectively, because it's not in our gift to control those contracts with the air network. So actually, you know, we've now got an agreement around it, whereas it was something the business could have done as a fait accompli, and we'd have had to react to that. So I think that's the first bit. The difficulty with start and finish times is we've always had a range of start and finish times across the UK because of where people are in the country. It has to be a fact, because for argument's sake, we have got Birmingham Mail Centre in the middle of the country that will have all of the mail due for delivery tomorrow morning in that mail centre, ready to be processed by 4 a.m. in the morning, and then versus Truro Mail Centre, which is likely to be 6 o'clock in the morning. There is already a 2-hour disparity between the arrivals. So we've got that. So we've always had staggered start and finish times around the country, and it's no different in the branch. So in terms of Lee's question, that there's 2 parts to the answer to Lee's. One is the union's committed to publishing the indicative start and finish times for every delivery office around the country before ballot papers are dispatched. Now, my view on that is, and I'm hopeful that I'm going to be, well, I know I'm going to be part of the National Joint Working Group that works on this. We're only going to make that indicative model better for all of the reasons around how do we enforce a better work plan, how do we enforce the standards right across the pipeline, so that's processing, distribution network, how do we get an integrated pipeline that operates better to enable that for delivery. And Lee being based in the mail centre, the Plymouth delivery office should be the earliest start and finish time within the branch, because there's nowhere for that mail to travel to. Once it's under the roof of the mail centre, they'll get that first. So in terms of some of the bits and pieces we do moving forwards, I would ask that people wait until they see what that time is, and rather than making knee-jerk reactions, because, as I've said, the vast majority of deliveries will be completed before 15:30. And based on the stuff that we saw last week and been shared by the business, is 65% of deliveries and then 65% of delivery offices will have a finish time before 15:30.
Okay, and I should have just said, because I'm going to try and make sure I mention everybody who took the time to answer a question, that David Mutton also asked that question as well, and I missed him off. So the next one I'm going to go to is Simon Spencer, and Lee Cansfield has also submitted this question about the pay. So I'll just read out Simon's version of it, because I did Lee's version before. But Simon said, we were promised an inflation-busting pay rise, yet what is being proposed is far below that. Surely the union must have known it was unrealistic to promise members a pay deal that was never going to happen. So I think that there's a couple of bits about that. I mean, just one thing, Spence, I am going to say I did the gate meetings in Tavistock, and I 100% did not say say to your unit that we were going to get a inflation busting pay rise. That definitely wasn't the message that went out in Plymouth and East Cornwall. But, you know, I can see how some members may have thought that from what the national comms was at the time. So that's what Simon said. You know, did we have the right strategy, and have we given our members unrealistic expectations when we started this dispute last summer, Tony?
So I understand the question, because listen, this is where the dispute started from, isn't it? So it actually wasn't even just last summer, was it, Rob? So I mean, you do it is rolling back actually probably about 14 months. So I think we had a policy forum in March 2022. At annual conference, the union agreed a policy that we should have a no strings pay deal, and that we would ballot on that. Now, herein lies a problem. The policy of the union nationally for a no strings pay deal was based on the fact that our members had worked through COVID and through that financial period for the business and delivered £758 million profit for the company and played a part in that. I think it was £411 million within Royal Mail Group in terms of Royal Mail letters. Now, our members absolutely 100% deserve to get the pay rise from that. However, things have overtaken us. So we balloted on a no strings pay deal. We had that massive yes vote, but within a month of that, we had to ballot again on pay and change, because the Royal Mail change agenda, which and I do think it's important people understand and reconcile with exactly what was said in June by the business. So the business produced lots of literature that was badged the change we need, and that went out in June. And, you know, it is a long time, and without repeating history, events overtook. So whilst we were after a no strings pay deal, the fact that the change agenda by Royal Mail was put on the table, and the fact that some of that then was done by executive action and withdrawal of our legally binding agreement, etc., events overtook us, and actually the dispute moved into pay and change. And actually, for lots of people up and down the country, and I know from standing on picket lines with people and doing branch meetings and gate meetings and doing these sort of forums with yourself, that the change agenda became the #1 issue. Now, we're always going to want more pay, and our members deserve maximum amount of pay, but I think it does need to be recognised in the sense of what the business said was their best and final offer in terms of the pay deal, and then versus where we've got to now. And obviously, there are some things that are going on behind the scenes in terms of trying to secure new monies, but it also needs to be seen in the context of, and this is through no fault of any CW member, but this has to be seen in the context of, come 2 days' time, this Thursday, the company is going to announce a loss of over £400 million. So I do think you have to see it in the context. That's through no fault of any of our members. That is, as the union said from day one, the mismanagement of the company. But hopefully that just explains for it. We're always going to want more, and union will continue to do more. And I think the thing we'll have to do, particularly as all of us, start to think about strategically, where do we go to next? So, you know, this is where we are here and now, but where do we go from 2025?
So I'm just going to ask you a quick supplementary question on that, Tony. It's not come up in the questions that come through, but I know this question has been asked all over social media, often by our members. So, and they're saying, are the union just taking Royal Mail's word for it that they've got all of these losses? How do we know that they're not selling us a duppy and that they're just going to give a load more money to the shareholders, having pretended they're losing money when they're not really, because people don't trust them?
Yeah, so I think there's two things, isn't it? So I think Royal Mail's directors, their accountants, their board, if it was proven that they were lying when it came to their financial results, that it's a criminal offence. They wouldn't be able to do that because of the fact the company is private and on the stock market, and the financial institutions. Listen, it would be a criminal offence, and they would be there. On top of that, listen, it's taken, I believe, a long time for Royal Mail to get their account signed off by their auditors as a going concern. And that is something that actually, when you give the contextual of the agreement and the here and now position, there was a real concern around Royal Mail as a going concern as a company going forward. So there is also that. Likewise, I think that scrutiny has been done by independent people from the union. So I believe, you know, that Dave and Andy were able to secure somebody that the union trusted to actually just give a high-level overview of the Royal Mail accounts, the Royal Mail finances. And I think it's been accepted that the company has been and is in a dire situation going forward. And we've got a number of concerns around that, and I think that's the one of the things around the here and now. You have to contextualize the disagreement in terms of, yes, the last 12 months, what's in the agreement, but also the stark realities we face going forwards. And I think that, me, as soon as Thursday comes and Royal Mail at 7 a.m. publish the results, I'll be all over it to actually see whether or not it is factually true going forwards.
Okay, so I'm going to take a couple of questions on sick now, if that's all right, Tony. So we've had first question, and I think I'll just let you try and deal with a load of this all in one, is from Andy, and he asks, with the new sickness terms when they're in place, will the ARs go back to zero, and will we get a clean state, or will people on an AR2 be put straight in at the deep end facing like dismissal? And then we've had Daniel Garrett from Plimpton, and I mean, he's saying that he would never vote for this agreement because of the lessons we learned from COVID about presenteeism, and the new agreement forces people into work sick out of fear of financial punishment. He thinks it's a major health and safety problem. So the first question is like a technical one. The second one, though, is I think that what we need to explain to people who see that in the way that Daniel does is what the situation was in terms of what Royal Mail's plans were if there's no agreement, and whether and how they have an ability to implement change on this by executive action. So I'll just hand that over to you now, Tony.
Yeah. So look, in terms of the first question, in terms of the transition arrangements from August the 1st, so, and I think it'll answer Dan's question as well at the same time. So originally, the business had served notice that by executive action, their plan was to make the changes on the sick absence pay and on unsick absence policy from an early retirement from the beginning of the financial year. They were threatening to do that by executive action, and they gave notice to do that. Now, obviously, the agreement, now there's a negotiated agreement in place, it gives it, in terms of the contextual around the agreed position on that, is that now won't change now until August the 1st. So those arrangements will go live from August the 1st. In terms of the transition arrangements between people that are currently brought up in the attendance standards and then move into the new application, what's been agreed is that the joint working group for the next 3 months will pick that up as one issue about how do you deal with the transition arrangements. So for argument's sake, someone that goes into a welcome back meeting on July the 31st versus someone that goes into one on the 1st of August, where there's the two changes. That's part of what we've got to do going forward. In terms of like the sick pay, it is important, I think, that people understand where we've moved up. Do we say this is a absolutely brilliant part of the agreement? We don't say that. The union has said nationally, this is a complete package. You can't just take out the bits that you like, and you can't take out the bits that you don't like. But in terms of the narrative, I do think people understand the business's original position was that for the second and all subsequent absences in a 12-month period, that the first 7 days of a second, third, fourth, and fifth absence would have been statutory sick pay, paid as in line with the payment for that. And that then moved to all absences after the first absence being after 4 days. And what the agreement has done is now brought that back to the second absence is the first 2 days, and the third absence is up to 4, and then fourth and fifth, etc., is the 3 days. Now, I do need to make this clear because a lot of people have said that that's against the law. The government policy is it's the first 4 days. This is Royal Mail introducing a company policy that's going to pay statutory sick pay for the first 2 absences, first 2 days of a second absence. Now, 75% of our members, 75% of Royal Mail employees, have no absences in a 12-month period. That's statistically been the pattern over the last few years. And of the people that have one absence, I think it's 55% of those people that have a one absence in a 12-month period then don't go on to a second absence. So, this isn't going to catch everybody. There is a number of people on that. Now, we don't like it, but we have bettered what Royal Mail were offering as part of the change we need and the best and final offer. It's completely shifted the landscape compared to what that is. And I think the other thing we need to take into cognizance is that before COVID, absence rates were 5.5%. Through COVID, it was 6.7%. And in the last 12 months, it's been over 8% in terms of the national average of people off sick. Now, we know what that is in terms of, we've just gone through one of the worst disputes we've ever had in our history, and the environment of going to work is not great. Now, We have agreed, though, that in line with the agreement, the 6 monthly reviews, i.e. so from the 1st of August to the 31st of January, if in that 6-month period absence goes below 5.5% nationally, then the full sick pay terms will be reintroduced. And then it will keep going on over the 6-month period. So that, do we have to do better in terms of understanding why people go sick? Do we have to, whether it be annual leave problems, whether it be the fact there's the resourcing is wrong in an office, there are lots of factors that lead into why there is absence problems in an office. But I think from where we've gone from to where we've got to now, it is a million miles away. Is it something that's brilliant for us? No, it's not, but we've done the best we can possibly do. And the agreement has to be looked at as a whole agreement, not just bits that we don't like. And the only other bit that I would pick up in relation to that bit going forwards is around the next few months. It is also going to look at the welcome back to work meetings and how the union is involved in that in terms of the structures. And I do know that, particularly when it comes to SSP, one of the things that will have to be looked at is whether or not for those first 2 days, 3 days on a third absence, 4 days on a third absence and 3 days on a fourth and subsequent absences, it's whether there's a day rate or whether there's an hourly rate. That's sort of some of the stuff that will be picked up.
And just sort of like a supplementary question there, Tony, and I alluded it to when I brought in. For somebody in Daniel's position who thinks this is a deal breaker, I just want to query here. If we say had a no vote, would that mean the sick would stay the same, or are Royal Mail threatening to and in a position to implement a change by executive action on this?
Yeah, so the union's view is that Royal Mail would actually just bring it in by executive action, because that was exactly what they were doing if there wasn't a collective agreement in place. That was the plan to do that from April the 1st. The only bit I don't think any of us can second guess, Ralph, is that if there was a no vote, would the business look to introduce what's in the agreement in front of our members now, or would they revert back to what they were offering in the change we need in the best and final offer, which was either it's all second and third and fourth absences in 7 days, or is it something else? I don't think we can second guess that.
Okay, so the next question, and Andy from the MDEC who asked a question about working from home, just to let you know that we're going to do a separate MDEC video, and there'll be a separate customer experience video and a separate parcel force video that'll be coming back soon for our minority grade. So that'll be, Andy, that'll be coded up in a different one. So Stu Walker has asked, Tony, is this deal legally binding, and what kind of future do you see for the Plymouth Mail Centre if the parcel network changes?
So I think there's 2 things for Plymouth Mail Centre. So one is absolute positive in the sense of the business have said there is no plans to close any mail centres. So again, I think from a job security point of view, that is an absolute positive in the sense of, for the life of this agreement, there isn't any plan to close any mail centres. Now, in terms of the legally binding, the business served notice on the legally binding contract September, October last year, and that is still in situ. Now, what I would say though, is if you look at section 3 of the agreement, in terms of the job security and the assurances over the company's future plans, lots of the wording within it was actually contained within the legally binding contract. However, what I would say is that some of that legally binding contract meant the union would have to have done the dispute resolution process and X, Y, and Z before we could take and ballot our members. Actually, the fact that that's been removed is not necessarily in place anymore. But if you do look at it in the sense of there'll be no compulsory redundancies, there will be no outsourcing, there will be no franchising of any parts of the business apart from the discussions that have already taken place in Fleet, and particularly for Parcel Force, our members in Parcel Force, that there will be a freeze of recruitment to owner drivers. They are all huge issues for us. And if you think about the compulsory redundancies, the business last year said to the union, there's going to be 10,000 redundancies within Royal Mail Group. They then said that they wanted a process for compulsory redundancies, and it is important that the union was being chased from pillar to post to meet Royal Mail on a compulsory redundancy process to be agreed. They were looking at if you were on a stage warning, if you were on a conduct warning, if you had customer complaints against you, if you didn't use the data and technology in the right way. That's what they wanted for a process for compulsory redundancies. They then moved into the fact of that the business said it won't be in any final agreement. The board, through Simon Thompson and the senior management board, signed a statement saying to its employees, we guarantee there'll be no compulsory redundancies up to the end of March 2023. We've now got written into the agreement that there'll be no compulsory redundancies for the life of the agreement, and it's only subject to a review in April 2025. At a time when you think about the change we're going through and and all of the stuff in it, that is a massive achievement for this union. And if you work in NEC, customer experience, or you're in one of the minority grades, the fact that now Royal Mail confirmed there is no plans to outsource or franchise any of the work you do, that is a significant achievement by this union.
Okay, so the next question, Mark Cutting from West Park has asked. There's quite a lot to this, so I'm just gonna summarise, Mark. I hope you don't mind. But effectively, he's asking about the new NCI procedure. He's also asking about the problems that we have with PDAs, and he's also asking, does this mean that us agreeing to this, that the chestnut of PDAs being linked to payroll and people having their pay docked based on this technology, does that mean that that's come back into play?
No, it doesn't, mate. And I do think this is important. So within the agreement, it's clear that the scan in, scan out technology will not be used and linked to payroll. So that's a massive shift from what the business had originally said. So link that back to the flexi time, yearly flexible hours, etc., that they're gone, and so has the link from scan in, scan out technology linked to payroll. That's gone. Now, in terms of the technology, in terms of data and technology and how that's used, there are some huge assurances within Appendix 5 of the agreement that gives that in terms of how that can be used and what it can be used for. And likewise, when it comes to the non-comparable improvement process, or the old NCI agreement, I think it's been around since 1980, what is, I think, reassuring is the fact that when it comes to what replaces that, is that both parties have agreed to deploy a new process and agree a process which will be fully compatible with the best practice from ACAS. So the fact that ACAS are going to be over governance to the agreement, if either party has got concerns around the spirit and intent of the agreement, we've got the use of ACAS, and we've got the use of Brendan Barber, who helped facilitate the agreement. Both parties have got that expertise to do that. But the fact that it will be on best practice, which will be, industry recognised standards, I think that people gives the assurances. And if you look at the introduction and the fact that Royal Mail gives an assurance, it isn't about using it to track individuals, isn't about using it to dehumanise the workplace, and won't be used in terms of a way which is draconian, all of that bits and pieces. Now, the only thing I would say is where it can be used within conduct, it makes it clear it can only be used where there's obviously a serious incident or action which leads to potential gross misconduct. And I suppose the concern for some of our members will be, and we know this particularly within our branch and around the country, the bar in which Royal Mail have operated gross misconduct to used to be up there. It's now basically on the floor. So there will be, but I think the words in the agreement and the safeguards will give us the protections. And if it's not being deployed, particularly Section 5, Appendix 5 isn't being deployed in line with that spirit and intent, then both parties will be flagging that up to ACAS.
Okay, thank you, Tony. I guess that segues naturally into the question that we've had from Paul Miners and Alex Taylor, which is, what does this do for our suspended reps and members? Now, you'll know that our branch have been hammered on this. We've had 2 of our reps sacked for nothing. We've got a third rep, the chair of the branch, Ali, who's facing a decision that we're not confident about in the next couple of weeks. We've also had another rep who felt that they needed to leave the business even though they weren't sacked because of the way that they were treated by the conduct procedure. So Tony, what does this agreement give us something that we can use for those people who've had their lives ruined for nothing more than putting their hand up and volunteering to be a CWU rep to look after their mates at work?
The simple answer is yes, mate. So the unions fought tooth and nail to get a process in place for our members and our reps that have faced trumped up charges, suspensions, conduct cases, dismissals since throughout the last 12 months. I think we were. I know what it means to the people in our branch and particularly the representatives, and I also know from a national perspective around the country, the people that have been fallen victim, and it is a victim to what's gone on in place in situ. But the agreement is clear that there is a terms of reference that will overseen by Lord Faulkner to conduct a review for anyone that wants their case to be done by that review. And I would encourage people to actually go for a review, because I think that'll be the most the most or the best process for them, and actually from an independent point of view, you know, where we think this has been policed by, whether it be the Bronze Command, the Silver Command, or the Gold Command, which Royal Mail have accepted they've had in place, this independent process will put all that right. And the key sentence within Appendix 7 is that the determinations reached by the review on individual cases will be final and binding on the union, the employer, and the individual. So absolutely, this is going to be a situation where, you know, if someone has been dismissed and the independent review says it was wrong and they should not have been dismissed and they should be back to work, that is binding on the company. They can't turn around and say, oh, we don't like that. And so for me, Appendix 7 is powerful, and it will surely put right all of the wrongs that every single one of us know has happened on lots of these cases.
Thank you. So I'm going to sort of take two questions here together. So Darren Horswell has asked, why have you given in to less IHR? It's a physically demanded job. Those who have to go should always be protected no matter what. And Ryan Brown has asked the question, why did the union agree to take away the 2 years pay for voluntary redundancy? And they're slightly different issues, but they're kind of linked. So I'll ask you to deal with them in one.
Yeah, so let's go with Ryan's first. So on TSF, we haven't agreed to the remuneration package as part of MTSF. Business changed that by executive action, and they removed the maximum of 2 years pay and put that back into a maximum of 9 months. And originally they added on the 6K, which they've now removed from the table. So the agreement says within it, the MTSF process remains in situ as it's agreed. The only part that's not agreed is the remuneration package. And as the union said, it will be down to individuals whether they want to accept voluntary redundancy based on those terms or not. The reason why we haven't agreed to the 9 months up front is because, particularly where if you take some of the airport hubs where there may be a site closure and there isn't a relocation and people haven't got an alternative, then the union reserves its right to try and increase that in terms of MTSF, particularly for major change. In terms of ill-health retirement, and that's what we said, this is about a complete package. But the business's position was for, in terms of ill-health retirement, for every week you've been off sick before the company gets sign off, whether it be from Atos Origin or from the occupational health, is that before that they say you're eligible for ill-health retirement, I may have been off 26 weeks. Company's position was that for every week you were receiving full sick pay in a period of time, that would then be deducted from your ill-health retirement. So bearing in mind the threshold for ill-health retirement is that you're not going to work for a reasonable amount of period or return to normal duties within a reasonable amount of period, which is normally defined as 9 months. Potentially someone could have been off already for 3 months, 6 months, and actually then that criteria is met, they would lose a significant proportion of the sort of 34 weeks plus the Lewin notice that was on top of that. So in terms of agreeing the 16 weeks, the union's position was that actually having the 16 weeks and a payment that everyone knows is 16 weeks plus your Lewin notice is better than the tapering down. And this is one of the things we've had to look at as a package, because in securing changes to retirement, one of the things that's happened in the negotiation is the attack on all the allowances that the business wants to be removed and bought out from individual remains. So there's like 55,000 people that had one of those 12 allowances that the company wanted to buy out of individuals. That's gone. They're now untouched. So it was one of those things that we've had to deal with in terms of a decision of how do we deal with the overarching change that Royal Mail were proposing in the tax, and that's how that's been captured as in the agreement.
Okay, so this question is probably sort of like going over, because you kind of touched on this when we were talking about the delivery issues earlier. But one of the things that Daniel Garrett asked us is between a combination of duties being designed to fail, that his worry, and with the changes that come in with this agreement with later start times, 30 minutes flex and seasonal variation, meaning that he's going to be out on the streets longer, that he might not finish until 17:30 at night. I had a similar discussion with a colleague of ours from the Postal Workers Say No online last night, suggesting that these things would be cumulative and delivery spans would be going up by like an hour and a half. Now, that isn't right, is it? You know, like there's some scaremongering going on about what's in the agreement. The only thing that's actually in the agreement that will, if it comes in, definitely change delivery spans is an indoor methods review, and the other stuff is scaremongering, isn't it, Tony?
Yeah. So, I mean, look, let's be absolutely crystal clear on seasonal variation. That does not change finish times. It absolutely doesn't. So seasonal variation makes it clear that in the times where you work the extra time, so on the up to 39 hours, it's before your duty. So if you are in office, as part of the changes with the end network and the start and finish times, if you're an office that moves to a 15-15 finish time, that's your finish time 52 weeks a year. So seasonal variation does not impact on that. What it will do is what in the summer periods, based on the pilot activity is 14 minutes later, 10 minutes finishing, you'd finish at 3:05 in the summer period. Now, the union's going to try and work to, we think that actually, when we get into that pilot activity, on the time when you're doing the less time, we actually think whilst there's better opportunities to get it all off at the finish time, because obviously there's that. So there absolutely isn't. In terms of flexibility, that we've had that in place since 2007. The agreement is clear that there's a review around how the 30-minute flex is being managed across the country now, and it should be, I'll come back to this point. If we get this right with the company, and the company is interested in this because they talk about more of a reliable resourcing model and accuracy for their employees, and that everyone knows what they're doing up front. We should know that at the start of the financial year, these are the weeks you're working the 35, these are the weeks you work on the 37, these are the 39. But then that deals with the workload fluctuations. You've done that in a plan. There should be then no need for sporadic on-the-day changes to that with flexibility. That is not what flexibility is about. Flexibility has always been about if there are force majeures. And a prime example is I'm driving a lorry to a delivery office A and I break down on the way. And in that context, lots of our members would understand that and actually go, yeah, fair cop, gov, I'm happy to stay out half an hour today, and then obviously we work that through. That's the bit we've got to pick up in terms of the narrative around it. So I don't think there is any scaremongering around people going to something in 30. The agreement's clear, and based on the stuff we've seen, Rolf, at this moment in time, the position is the indicative model shows is only 7% of delivery officers that finish after 1600.
Thanks for that, Tony. I should point out that our area distribution rep has made it completely clear that you're not fit to drive a lorry anymore, and there's no way you can be considered a professional driver moving forward. I'm going to go back to Lee. He's asked us lots of questions, and I think this one might get your eccles up a little bit, Tony, but Lee's asked it, and despite what he says, we're not shying away from the difficult questions. So Lee's basically saying that he thinks that the reason why we've done this deal is to protect the union's recognition and facilities, and he thinks that we've accepted a dampened down pay deal in exchange for being left alone by the employer. So do you think that the CWU has put its own rights before those of the workforce, and that we have agreed a deal that's less good than one we think could have been agreed if we'd taken different choices in respect of the CWU's recognition agreements?
Absolutely, I don't know. So I think that's fundamentally not true. So I've seen all sorts of wild accusations about Dave Ward being given a bung, Andy Fury's been given a bung. This was all about protecting the union. This is not. Look, I think people have to understand that 12 months ago, the company wanted to remove the trade union from the workplace because they're removing the trade union from the workplace and attacking the trade union on everything that we do in terms of our membership was to enable them to bring in inferior terms and conditions for everybody, not just for new entrants, but for the whole workforce. And that's where that attack come from. Now, do I think, is there lessons to be learned in terms of the decisions we made in terms of the strategies on industrial action? Like, there's always lessons to learn. And I think, listen, at some point, the union will have that conversation. But what we've always tried to do when it comes to industrial action is manage the expectations for circa 130,000 employees and the 130,000 of our members. Because for everyone that says we should have gone out for a week of industrial action, there's another 50 people that says I can't do more than 2 days in a day. So we've always had to try and take that. And I think this is testament to our members. Even if you took the Royal Mail narrative, that on any given strike day, that their view was, well, there's 10,000 people working nationally. We have got more than that in terms of non-members. So if you looked at that percentage of people working, that's less than our non-members. So it's testament to our members that they did take the industrial action for 17 days, did support the union. And we've now got an agreement that puts the union front and center of everything that happens going forwards in the direction of travel, whether it be new products and services, whether it be growth ideas, whether it be how we restore quality of service and universal USO compliance, how we deal with all of the changes within it. The union is within that, which will only benefit our members in that workplace. So this aspersions that the unions gained out of this, for me, it's completely fabrication. It's just not true. That our members want a union to represent them in the workplace. And what the business was trying to do was remove our workplace representation and actually look at more of a structure that was regionalised. And like you know this as well, in particularly from as your role as branch secretary, there are lots of unions that would absolutely love the structure that we have in place, and the fact that we have local reps in every office, we have our area reps, we have our divisional reps, and we have that structure in place. That was what was under attack, and we've got that in place, which would only benefit what happens in our workplaces. And do we have to be better on how we support our workplaces? Yes, we do. And I've always said this, the collective we as a union across all of our structures have to do better and hold Royal Mail to account to the words that are in this agreement.
And I would just say that every unit I go to tells me this year, since Royal Mail started just implementing the revisions by executive action, has been the worst that it's ever been in Royal Mail. And, you know, ladies and gents, the only thing I'll say is if you don't like the last 3 months when they just did whatever they wanted whenever they want, welcome to the rest of your working life if the company are successful in getting rid of your trade union. So the last question I'm going to ask, and lots of different people have asked this, Jeremy, Ryan, Mark Cutting, Lee Cansfield, Alex, and I think lots of people. And the question is, what's going to happen if we get a no vote? You know, Tony, that it seems to me like the sort of social media campaigns against the deal and stuff sort of are seeing this deal like, you know, the £32,000 question in Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, where if you get that one right, you've got that money absolutely banked and guaranteed, and you can risk everything for £64,000 because you're guaranteed to work away with £32,000. Now, you know, my view is that that's not the case, that there are potential adverse effects that could happen if we get a no vote. So, you know, what is it? Does Royal Mail definitely keep the offer on the table? Is there a chance that Royal Mail will do worse? And this thing about administration, is that a real threat? Is that something that could actually happen? And if it did happen, what would it be like for postal workers?
It's a very open-ended question in terms of what could happen, because I think, look, we'd be second guessing the employer. But look, I say this from a position of confidence, right? If I believe that Dave and the postal officers could have got anything better than this in this agreement as a PEC member, then listen, I would have been pushing for that. And I know that they have got every minutiae in this agreement that they could have got based on the sacrifices our members have taken so far. I think we have to understand that it took 17 days of industrial action and up to Christmas Eve for the business's mindset to change to, we actually want an agreement with the union. We are prepared to change the change we need proposals. We are prepared to change the best and final offer. How many times did our members hear the best and final offer? That's it. I think we were on version 10 by the time we got into that group. Now it's taken between January and we moved. I think this is the bit that people have to understand. We moved to a new process that removed the CEO from the talks and it put in the 2 non-executive directors. And it's taken a huge amount of time to get every part of this agreement over the line. Some parts of it were probably done in March time. But the union made it clear that nothing was agreed until everything was agreed, and it took to the last stage. So I think we have to understand. You know, I know that everything that could possibly be conceded in the talks is there. Now, if there is a no vote, listen, and everyone's entitled to make their own democratic choice. What I would say is, and I have seen lots of stuff on social media that's factually just not true. You know, I'm going to reissue. I think I did a 9-page document. And soon after the negotiators agreement was released, I'm going to release that again this week in terms of myself, because I do think it's important, because on every single issue that Royal Mail put forward, we have moved the company position. Whether or not it's enough for some of our members, they'll make that democratic choice, but we have moved the company's position on every single point. Now, if there is a no vote, listen, I don't think we can second guess what the business would do, whether they would make some of the changes by executive action. But what I do know is there would be massive questions, but there would also be massive decisions for the union to make going forward, because, and this isn't scaremongering, I think this is a factual position. On Thursday, the company is going to report losses of over £400 million. A union making decisions to reinstigate industrial action and call further strike dates would be, and I think we would all have to understand, what would that mean for the collective Royal Mail and our members' jobs? Because I don't think it is, I'm not saying it's a threat, but there is huge consequences, and we would have to consider, if we announce further industrial action, then Royal Mail will lose more contracts, revenue will decline, and actually moving the company spiraling towards some form of administration is a very, very real possibility. And likewise, I do think the company's accountants would say that the company isn't a going concern. So I think there is huge. Now, look, that's not to scaremongering, that is a factual position of where we are. And I think that will become clearer as this week goes on. And that's why I think, conversely, I think that's why the company made the decision last week to, whilst it's reported that the CEO resigned, so we all know what goes on behind the scenes in terms of that. I think that's why they've made that decision now. They've reached an agreement with the union. The union and its members have got real concerns around the trust and confidence of that agreement and what's being put to our members actually landing in delivery offices, in mail centres, in distribution functions, in index, customer experience, in parcel force, etc., etc. And I think our members' concerns have been heard loud and clear from senior management. They've made that change. I think there'll be more change in the coming months. So you can't second guess that, but I am confident that there is nothing else to gain. I genuinely believe that. If Dave and Andy could have got anything more, I know it would have been in there. And listen, the union has pushed Royal Mail to as far as it can possibly concede. Okay, well, thank you for that, Tony. I think we've gone through all of the questions that we had, and it's been a long session, so for everyone who's managed to watch to the end, thank you very much. I hope this shows, by the way, for all of the detractors that we've had in the branch, that we ain't shying away from difficult questions that you've had. And I know that we've had some difficult conversations in the workplace where we've been so far, and we're going to have those moving forward. But, our promise to you has always been that we'll have the conversations with you, that you'll be informed. You are the ones who get to make up your mind, but this is part of it. That if people think this has been a useful session between me and Tony, and you've got more questions that you'd like to ask and you'd like to see this repeated, say it in the comments down below. And obviously, schedules dependent, me and Tony will look to do something again. So in finishing, Tony, if I could just say thank you very much for taking an hour out of your schedule to film this. I know the members have been asking us for it for some time, and I'm sure they all appreciate that you've taken the time and you've been so frank in your answers. Yeah, no worries, mate. And we'll see you all in the workplace soon. So watch this space. All right, keep the faith and support your union.